Hey everyone, this is Pete, and welcome back to Atari A to Z, a series of short playthroughs of Atari 8-bit games, some which I grew up with and some which are new to me. Today is one of the former. Today we're looking at the Atari 8-bit version of Gauntlet, which was a 1987 conversion of the popular 1985 Atari Games arcade machine, developed by Gremlin Graphics of all people for US Gold and published in the United States by Mindscape. Gauntlet's original design stemmed from a 1983 Atari 8-bit game called Dandy, which we've previously seen here on Atari A to Z. There was a bit of controversy over this at the time of Gauntlet's original release though, since Dandy's creator John Palovich was never given any credit or royalties by Ed Logg, Gauntlet's creator. Palovich actually threatened a lawsuit over this, but it never made it to court. Atari Games allegedly gave him a Gauntlet arcade machine to keep him quiet, and Dandy eventually formed the basis for Dark Chambers, an Atari Corporation release for 2600, 7800 and Atari 8-bit in 1988, a year after Gauntlet's Atari 8-bit release. This port of Gauntlet for Atari 8-bit isn't especially fondly regarded, but it was my first encounter ever with the game, and thus I've got some good memories of it. So, let's go play Gauntlet. Okay, here we are with Gauntlet, the Atari 8-bit version, which we're presently loading from disk. There was a cassette version of this as well, which has come in for a lot of criticism over the years for its excessive load time. It was something like 37 minutes to load this game from cassette, which is not really all that unusual for Atari games, to be honest, because although loading stuff from cassette was pretty widespread in the 8-bit era generally, the Atari 8-bit's cassette drive was notoriously slow at transferring data. So while you can load a Spectrum game in a couple of minutes in most cases, most Atari stuff that came on cassette took so long to load. And that's why I think so many Atari users upgraded to a disk drive as soon as they possibly could. From what I can make out, I think disk drive ownership was quite a bit more widespread on Atari platforms than it was on stuff like the Commodore 64 and the Spectrum in particular, just because it was so much more practical and also much easier to pirate stuff as well. Anyway, this is the Atari 8-bit version of Gauntlet, which was programmed by Gremlin Graphics. I actually didn't realise that. Game programmer was Bob Armour, graphics by Kevin Bulmer, with sound and additional programming by Bill Allen. I don't recognise any of those names. I do recognise Ben Dalglish's name because he did quite a lot of stuff in the 8-bit period. Tape users, leave play pressed on tape. When you reach the end of side 2, rewind fully and press play to resume game. So yeah, not only did it take ages to load, you had to load during the game as well. Oh, nightmare. Anyway, press space to continue. Player 1, joystick 1, magic button, spacebar. Player 2, joystick 2, magic button, keys 0 to 9. Press select, pause game, except in treasure rooms. To choose your hero, point the glove at the character and press fire. Alright, so Gauntlet is a pretty well-known game, but on the assumption that some of you seeing this aren't familiar with it, this is regarded by a lot of people as the birthplace of the action RPG genre. In practice, it's more action and less RPG, but you do have these 4 different character classes. You've got Thor the Warrior, Questor the Elf, Thyra the Valkyrie, and Merlin the Wizard. And each of these characters have their own unique capabilities. So in Gauntlet, you can defeat enemies by walking into them, which is regarded as hand-to-hand combat. And sorry, I just trod on something. I was just making sure it wasn't something that I'm not supposed to unplug while I'm recording. Walking into stuff is regarded as hand-to-hand combat. Everyone has a ranged attack as well, so Thor throws axes, Questor shoots arrows, Thyra throws swords because that's practical, and Merlin shoots magic. And then they each have their own armor rating, which determines how much damage they take when enemies walk into them, and their own magic power as well, which determines what the magic potions do. So they've all got strengths and weaknesses. So for example, Thor is very strong, takes less damage, but when he uses a magic potion, it doesn't damage as many things as when Merlin uses it, for example. So ideally, in the original arcade game, you'd have 4 players covering all of these characters, so you could cover every eventuality. In this Atari 8-bit version, you can only play up to 2 players at once. So yeah, let's go for Questor, because he was always my favourite growing up. And then we load again. I don't know how well you can hear this loading sound on the recording. I might turn it up a little bit. But the Atari 8-bit had sort of two different tones you could have for disk loading. This is the quieter one. And I think it was just like a poke to a particular location in memory to switch between the two sounds. And I always sort of associated this particular loading sound with, I guess, more mature, complex games for some reason. I don't know why, because Gauntlet isn't especially grown up or mature game or anything like that. But yeah, that was always an association I made. Right, I have to flip the disc over, so I'll be right back. All right, disc flipped. Let's continue. Right, press fire to begin. And we start at level 1. Now, you'll notice if you start as a one-player game, player 2 is pre-selected for you. So if player 2 was to join in by pressing fire on joystick 2, which you can do in this, which is a really cool thing, they would have to be Thor. Whereas if you start a two-player game from the very beginning, both players would be able to pick their characters. So that was a bit of a flaw in this game's execution, depending on how you look at it. But chances are, if you're going to sit down and play a game of Gauntlet with someone on your computer, you're probably going to go from the beginning together. Alright, here's a key. That opens this door. These piles of bones here, these are monster generators that produce these ghosts. And anyone familiar with Diablo will know all about the strategy of standing in a doorway and letting enemies come at you one at a time. It is just as valid here in Gauntlet as it always has been in Diablo. However, because of the way we have these monster generators, at some point you're going to have to wade into the middle of all that and get rid of the generators. Otherwise the monsters are just going to keep coming. Oh God, we've lost a lot of health already. Take that food for a bit of healing. And you know what, rather than jumping straight into the harder level, I've lost so much health, Jesus Christ. Rather than jumping straight into the harder levels, I'm just going to go to level 2 here. I should have done that straight away, really. But yes, one thing about Gauntlet is it has loads of levels. I forget exactly how many it has. I know the expansion pack, Gauntlet, the Deeper Dungeons, had 512 levels. Not sure about this one. I want to say 100? That might just be a specific version of it. Right, I've got a magic potion now. If I press spacebar, that wipes out all the enemies. It doesn't wipe out generators, though, if you're the elf. If you want to wipe out the generators with your potions, you need to be Merlin the Wizard. Now, there are obviously elements of this conversion of Gauntlet that are very clunky. A lot of people don't like this version very much, especially compared to some of the other ones, like the Atari ST version, which isn't really a fair comparison. And even the Commodore 64 version and stuff, because it's quite slow, it's quite clunky, the controls are a little bit unresponsive at times. But this version was my first encounter with Gauntlet. This is where I learned what Gauntlet was. Where I learned what a popular and well-known game it was at the time. And I didn't play the arcade version or even the ST version until much later. And so I've still got quite a lot of time for this version, as flawed as it is. That's because, like, so many of the things I covered on the series, it reminds me of happier times. But just so much about this game has stuck with me over the years. Just the design of the enemy generators, the way the enemies look, the way they sound. And from a modern perspective, there's a lot about Gauntlet that I don't like. I really don't like the health system. For one thing, the way it ticks down is very unpleasant, for one thing. But that was sort of something designed for the arcade machine, and something that Atari did in quite a few of their subsequent games as well. If you ever play Zybots, which we covered on Atari ST, said that also has the declining health system, and it's just as annoying there as well. But part of the trouble with a lot of home versions of Gauntlet is because they try and adapt the arcade machine a little bit too closely, they often provide you with the ability to add more health, as if you'd put another coin in the arcade machine. And that kind of removes all element of challenge from the game. Because it basically means you can't die. Now, you can't do that in this one. Which means there's probably a finite distance you can get through the game before you just die. And there we are. I'm dead. And I don't think there's a continue system. Or is there? Nope, we go right back to the beginning. So yeah, you'd better be ready to get through as far as you can on one credit. And you'll also notice that there was no opportunity to change your character. So if you wanted to change your character, you'd have to load the whole bloody game again. Not too much of a problem on the disc version. But for tape owners, I hope you made the right choice to begin with. Because otherwise, there's another 40 minutes out of your life to start it up again. And I remember we owned quite a few games on tape for Atari 8-bit, and it always felt like a sort of significant moment to play one of them, because you had to make such an effort and commit such amount of time to loading them that you better be damn sure you wanted to play it before you put it into the tape recorder. And people complain about load times today. I don't know. So stuff like this is why when people talk about, say, the PS5, or the PS5 has instant load times with its magic SSD, I'm just like, I don't care, because like, I remember when it was really bad. Until you've waited 40 minutes to play a game, you know nothing about load times. Yeah, one of the other troubles I've always had with Gauntlet is that for so much of it, it feels like taking damage is unavoidable. Like, if you look at the speed the Ghost approached me, and the fact that it takes 2 shots from Questor's elf to kill them, and in a lot of cases it's impossible to defeat them before they've done some damage to you. Unless you want to run away from each and every single one of them. Which may well be a sound strategy, but it's not. I don't know. Maybe I'm just playing this wrong. It's entirely possible. Get out of here. Right, we're in a slightly better position this time. You just get into a situation like this and it's just impossible to move. Get some health back from the cider. Just gonna try and avoid the enemies as much as possible, although that's not entirely possible. Yeah, God, how would you... I kind of think back to when I played this back in the day and like how far I'd get, and because with the amount of health you're given and the fact it ticks down and the fact that damage is unavoidable to a certain extent, yeah, it feels like there's a hard limit to how far you'd be able to go in this game. Because surely the very design of it means that you're pretty much always losing health faster than you're gaining it. But yeah, this is why sort of over the years I recognise Gauntlet for what it created and what it accomplished back in its time period, but while a lot of people sort of are really excited at any opportunity to sort of return to Gauntlet and play it again, I'm always a bit about the prospect, because there's so much about it that kind of annoys me a bit. Yeah. Right, I'll tell you what we'll do now. I'm going to load the game again, and we'll try playing as one of the other characters. So I will rejoin you when we've gone through all the loading rigmarole. So I'll be right back. Okay, here we go with Merlin the Wizard, who is the weakest in terms of taking damage and melee power, but he has the most powerful shots, and he also has the most effective magic. So you see, he's much more capable at dispatching those ghosts before they get to him, as any good wizard should be. Right, I'm going to go through here, and we're going to skip to level 4. So you see, it actually did sort of 2 points of damage to that generator, rather than just the 1. But he does take a lot of damage from enemies. So let's have some of that. And we'll just go straight to level 4, because that's where we got to before. Alright, magic potion. Oops. Stay away. Well, the controls are quite sluggish in this. Like, if you want to change direction. It is quite sluggish. And that can, in certain circumstances, lead to taking damage, which is not great. But it's one of those games where you can sort of learn to cope with that sort of thing as well. As long as you know the limitations of what you're working with, you can sort of figure out how to counterbalance that, I guess. See, we're taking so much less damage as Merlin, just because we can destroy everything before it gets to us. Which is great. If you've ever played an MMO where you've played a wizard, you know that ideally what you want to do is destroy everything before it gets even vaguely close to you. That's like my enduring memory of the time I spent playing World of Warcraft was sort of really getting a feel for the wizard class in that, and or mage or whatever they called it. Don't shoot the food. And yeah, in that there was a really nice feeling of destroying stuff before it even got to you. Final Fantasy XIV is pretty good for that as well, with the Black Mage class. Quite a few ranged DPS character classes in Final Fantasy XIV, and they can all achieve that, kill something before it gets to you to a certain degree. But there will always be something particularly special about the Black Mage in particular, because he blows big boomy fireballs. Everyone loves big boomy fireballs. Now, in theory, I should be able to... There we are. Use that magic potion there, and that will blast some of the generators from afar, so I don't have to worry about them by the time I get round to that point of the map. Which will be nice. So yeah, I feel like your enjoyment of this game will very much depend on which character class you pick, because like when I was a kid, I was always like super into elf characters for some reason. I think that sort of stemmed from things like Hero Quest and stuff like that, because the elf in Hero Quest was one of the best characters, because he had wizard spells, but he could also fight, so he was pretty amazing. And so I was always a bit disappointed in Gauntlet when it was so difficult to survive as the elf if you were by yourself. If you're playing with another person, I suspect the situation would be rather different. Because the elf can then provide some much needed additional damage around the place, but by yourself, when the enemies are constantly coming for you, he just doesn't really have any survivability. I remember when I was a kid, I sort of never really worked out immediately that those were supposed to be treasure chests. I wasn't sure what they were, but I just knew they gave you points, but for some reason I never made the association with treasure chests. I just didn't quite get my head around the fact that it was a treasure chest as viewed from above. One thing I will say about this game is it does quite an admirable job of keeping that many characters on screen doing stuff all at once. I mean, yes, they don't move very smoothly or anything because they're probably using characters rather than sprites. But it's quite impressive to see the humble Atari 8-bit throwing around that many things on screen at once. And it not having a noticeable impact on how the game runs. I mean, okay, the game doesn't run amazingly to start with, but I suspect this was a case of the developers knowing their limitations to begin with and not trying to be too ambitious. Right, I believe there's a warp to level 8 if we can make it along here. So let's just try and clear a path through these ghosties. And these ghosties. And some more ghosties. Stop respawning. Diablo strats time. There's the exit to 8. Let's take full advantage of that. See, we've lasted so much longer as the wizard. The wizard is supposed to be the weakest character in terms of sort of defense and so on. But his attack power is so significant that he has managed to last way longer than the elf, although with the arrival of the demons on the scene here, that might be all about to change. Right. It would be easy to go through one of those exits at the beginning, but I'm going to have an explore, because treasure. Because that's what you do in Gauntlet. You ignore the easy option and you wade directly into a large group of monsters and die, all in the name of getting some more points, which are ultimately meaningless. Stop that. More treasure. Yes, please. Thank you very much. Ah, it's the chucky things. So they've actually implemented most of the stuff that was in the arcade game. The manual does talk about sort of collecting like the various potions that give you enhanced shots and that sort of thing. I'm not 100% convinced that those are in this version. Just because the game doesn't seem to have the facility for like displaying the messages that are associated with those, for example. And for sure, enhanced shots or invincibility would be very welcome. Got some food there, but I suspect we're probably not going to last that much longer now. Particularly as we're getting stuff flung at us. Oh, there's some wizards in there as well. Yeah, so certainly most of the major enemy types are in here. It's just not a super pretty version of the game. It's not an amazingly implemented version of the game. The controls aren't great. The lack of a continue system is a bit of a problem. But, you know, could be worse. Could be much worse. Where do we go from here, then? Ooh. 93 health. I suspect wherever we go, it's not very far. Still, I got over 10,000 points. That's something. What happens if I go up here? I meet a ghost. Ooh, that looks like a not very fun room. So let's go in. Now I'm dead. Hooray. Anyway, I think that pretty much sums up the Gauntlet on Atari 8-bit experience. Yeah, it's been fun to return to that because, like I say, despite all its flaws, and I feel like I've complained about this version quite a lot as we've played it today, but yeah, I do have fond memories of this because, as I say, it was my first encounter with both Gauntlet as a game and with this type of game, really, with the sort of top-down action-adventure, quasi-action RPG sort of thing. I guess there was also Gateway to Apshay, which is a different kind of experience, but it's still an action RPG. And in fact, more of an RPG than Gauntlet is, in fact. But yeah, even so. Like I say, this has had some fairly mixed reception over the years, and a lot of people vastly prefer the versions on other platforms. I know the Commodore 64 version is fondly regarded, and the ST version is very good. But yeah, this exists. It's a thing. Let's leave that there for today then. As always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again next time.